you guys can feel free to do so. And you can also use the background that we've provided in the WhatsApp group. So, and if you also need the background, if you're not in the WhatsApp group and you want to use the background, you can just say so in the chat and we can provide it to you. Yeah, so feel free to open your camera like if you're not, if you're shy pun tak apa je. It's just a very casual thing. Tapi later on, we're gonna have a photography session. So hopefully by that time, you guys can also open your cameras. You don't have to open for the whole session if you don't want to. It's all up to you. Okay. Itu je. And we're starting in a few more minutes. I think, okay. Just let's give a few more minutes. Okay, so Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Then I guess we can start now. So before we start our session, let's all recite Surah Al-Fatiha. Okay, so Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum and good evening, everyone, especially everyone who's joining us today, and especially our fellow speaker, Dr. Fatima Al-Atas. Thank you for making your time to join us for this very casual session. Okay, so before we go towards the main point of this session, I'm just gonna briefly introduce what this whole session is really about lah. So we're gonna focus on spreading awareness about period poverty. We're gonna talk about it. We're gonna discuss about it. maybe like ask a few questions about it. And so to everyone who's here, you guys can, if you guys have any questions, we're gonna have a Q&A session after this. So yeah, so let's start lah the session with our introduction. Maybe okay, Dr. Fatima Al Atas. Okay, Dr. Fatima, let's just okay. Maybe you can introduce yourself to the audience, a bit of your background, and okay, let's start with that first lah before we go straight to the questions.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining, and also thank you to the organizers for having me. I'm Dr. Fatima Alatas. I am a sociology lecturer at the Department of Sociology and Anthropology, which is at the AHAS KIRKHS Abu Hamid Abdul Sulaiman Kuliah of Islamic Revealed Knowledge and Human Sciences. I'm also the coordinator for Social Issues and Development Center. Currently, I'm running a few research on period poverty in Malaysia, but otherwise, I'm generally interested in or really up for projects or research work relating to gender, relating to inequalities, family, and work. So that's like my area. What else? I suppose by virtue of doing a lot of work on period poverty, I have somehow been called an advocate for period poverty. So that's some of the things that I do. Maybe we can you can ask me more questions later.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much, Doctor. So, to inform our participants, maybe some of you guys are not aware that we are students from IIM, and Dr. Fatima is also a lecturer in IIM, if I'm not mistaken, right? Yeah. So, yeah, that's just something that I would just like to point out. If you're wondering where we are based in our institution, lah, basically. Okay. So, we can start with the first few questions that I have that we have for tonight. So just now, Doctor, you said you are basically known as kind of an advocate for especially for period poverty. Maybe you can explain to us how you came about to macam jadi an advocate for this. Like, what made you become interested in advocating for this issue, especially?
Okay, so I think maybe we can start from the beginning.
Boleh.
One day, no, in the in the beginning, I had no idea about period poverty in Malaysia. I had read some things about period poverty elsewhere. Not clear idea of what period poverty was. So this was back in 2018. But I had just come back from my PhD, and then I was serving the university the year after that. So I was obviously the beginning of my academic career, looking for research areas and things like that. But my focus had always been on gender, family, and work. So period poverty is slightly off, but how I found it was through grassroots work. So there are like a lot of homeless people in KL, in particular around Pasar Seni area, and there's a lot of work in terms of our community, just like how we see a lot of people helping out other people, right? So, we are a generous community generally. So it was one of those food distribution nights that I was joining. With some NGOs, and then while we were giving out the food packets, a lady came and asked if we had brought any sanitary pads. And I was a bit shocked at the time. I was like, oh no, I said we don't have, we only have food. And then I said, you don't have access to these products ke, tak dapat ke, tak ada pad ke. And then she said they don't have a lot of access to sanitary products in general, like toothbrush and things like that. So that experience really struck me, like, oh, I had not considered that that was something that people didn't have access to. It's like time to check your privilege, Fatima, right? But it wasn't something that was hard to understand, because as a sociologist we can sort of make that connection, or even as a a layperson, you can make the connection that if somebody cannot afford to buy food, they can't afford to get through their day-to-day lives, there's probably a lot of other things that they cannot afford besides food, right? All the basic things that they won't be able to afford, and by virtue of being homeless, they also don't have access to toilets, sanitation, space to keep their things and things like that. So I just didn't know how bad it was, and I wondered if that was the only case, or like, oh, that must be like some really remote case. But the curiosity was there, so I started to look for more information, started to ask other NGO friends, and I found out that, oh no, this is not one remote case that I just found of a lady. And then I found several different reports, but they are very far in between and with very little information. So there were like news reports, one every few years, of like a group of women helping out other women with sanitary products and things like that. Sometimes in rural, remote areas in Malaysia, and then sometimes in like poor urban areas, but then there's nothing else. So there wasn't any initiative, official initiative done on any part. So I went to the academic side of things and looked for research in Malaysia on period poverty, and there wasn't anything. So in the same year, in 2018, we also read, I don't know if you all know this, but in 2018, UNICEF published a report to say that kids in Malaysia, especially those living in urban poverty, were experiencing or are experiencing malnourishment. And that was a shocking report, I think, in 2018. But that gave me like something to think about. You know, we have a growing number of urban poor in KL in particular, or in Klang Valley in particular. That means that we have a lot more people who cannot afford basic things. So that somehow got me into this work and realizing that, oh, okay, I need to start something. So I applied for a grant to research period poverty, particularly just looking at urban poor in KL. That's how it started. But as I'm doing the research, it sort of unravels itself. So now we have like, oh, there's a lot of things we need to do. And because of that, I suppose it wasn't, you know, when you do research, sometimes you can, the research process, I think for some of you who might not be familiar like with academic process, it takes a long time even for us to put things into publication, and that publication goes into the scholarship world where the people who read our work are, you know, researchers, scholars, but it doesn't go into action, it doesn't translate into changing or impacting the society. So I felt that people need sanitary pads. As a female, I can only imagine what that's like, not being able to have basic needs just to manage our menstruation. So I suppose at the time I realized I had to do more than just publish my work, which could take years, and then for somebody to read it could take another a long time. So there was a need to also advocate for the issue.
Oh, okay. That was such a like it's a very apa nama thorough lah, the fact that you're advocating for it, and you've done research, and now that you're trying to take action juga lah. That's I also just learned that it's like more serious than on the surface lah of what we see, because even now in 2021 we can see that ramai je yang still baru nak tahu what period poverty is. I myself pun macam just recently, like last year, baru tahu, oh, this thing exists and it's very serious. And even you yourself, doctor, you pun eventually learned that sebenarnya this issue is nationwide. It's not just, dekat just one area. And it's shocking lah, because as a female we would know how some susah it is to have periods every month, and not having access to basic needs is just very terrifying to think about lah. Okay, thank you for that. Very, like, that was very eye opening lah to me personally. Okay, maybe we can let's go to the main issues. So, in your professional opinion, doctor, maybe also your personal opinion, what do you think are the main issues that would revolve around period poverty? Like, for example, is it society's mindset ke, or like lack of awareness and education, or are there any macam overshadowed issues that should be brought into light when it comes to period poverty? What are
Okay.
your opinions? Okay.
I think we skipped one part just now,
Oh, okay.
is defining what period poverty is.
Oh,
In order for us to
yeah, yeah,
identify where the problem is, we really need to define what period
yeah. Okay.
poverty is, right? So
Okay.
basically, period poverty, even though I highlighted just now the lack of access to sanitary pads, period poverty is actually the inability for menstruating bodies to manage their menstrual health safely and healthily. So
Mm.
if someone or a group of people are unable to manage their menstrual health, then we can classify that under period poverty. It could be, or more likely be, the result of poverty, but it could also be the result of other issues. Okay, so what do we need to manage our menstrual health? There are needs that are relating to product, right? So you need the menstrual cup, or you need a sanitary pad, whether it's disposable, reusable, tampons, whatever material that is either absorbent or can hold the blood in a safe and healthy way, then that we consider that as a menstrual product. So we can't use tissue because tissue doesn't hold the blood enough, right? You can't go out and do activities. Yes, it's absorbent, but you might only last for what, an hour before it starts to leak. So that we don't consider that as a safe and healthy option for a menstrual product. Or like cloth, like there's a lot
Ah,
of
yeah.
conversation around, why don't people just use cloth? Yes, you can use cloth, but that means that you can't go to work or you can't go to school using cloth because it will leak, right? So
Mm.
then we don't consider that as a proper menstrual product. And then we have facilities. At this point, some of you will realize, like, oh no, we might be experiencing this too. Facilities means having access to clean water, having access to toilet, having access to disposal management and hand wash. Okay, surprisingly, but maybe not so surprising. Maybe it's surprising for me because I left school many years ago. But surprisingly, we find that we have issues of slow running water at school. Usually, there's no hand soap, and the bins are always filled. So kids or school going children cannot dispose their sanitary pads properly. Or if you go to public toilets, even, and then sometimes doors of the toilets cannot be locked. So these are infrastructural facility issue. And there are parts in like Malaysia, for example, where people don't have access to clean water, or they don't have access to toilets, they don't have access to disposal management. For example, they might have gotten donation for sanitary pads, but there's no place to throw it, right? And the sanitary pads are not like biodegradable or anything like that. So then we find issues relating to disposal management. So the second one, and then the third is knowledge or information about menstrual health, information about reproductive system and things like that, would also be another element to look at. So whether or not
Mm.
we have been taught proper things about our cycle. Do girls and women know what the menstrual cycle is? That menstruation is normal. Not getting menstruation is not normal. That menstruation is not a disease. Women who menstruate are not dirty. And things like that. So proper knowledge about menstrual health, also relating to pain, right? Period pain, what's normal and what's not normal. When do you need to seek for help and things like that. So that will be number three. And then we have the ability to manage our menstrual health in a dignified way. This part is a bit tricky because it's very cultural and social related, meaning that in different societies, being able to manage our menstrual health with dignity may look different, right? Or may be affected by different cultural norms and taboos and things like that. So it could be as simple as having privacy to manage our menstrual health, being able to close the door, or not being teased at school, or for example at home when you are having your menstruation, or period spot check that challenges, right, that shames girls or women for having their period. So then we wonder whether that, or we don't wonder, we know that that doesn't allow girls to manage their menstruation with dignity. Or being discriminated for having menstruation, for example, being separated or in some cultures they are put in a hut, not allowed to eat from the same plate or not allowed to cook and things like that. So there's a lot of cultural issues. So you can see the challenges that relate to period poverty has to do with all of these things, whether or not we're giving good education to our kids or our population, whether or not we have certain stigma. It could be even stigmas like women cannot lead because they menstruate. So when they menstruate, they're emotional, so they don't make good leaders, for example. That's being discriminated for having menstruation, for example. And things like that. So there are a lot of things that we can look at, and then the issues would be dependent on those areas that we want to look at. Okay, and then we have the elephant in the room, which is the culture of concealment around menstruation. Okay, so the culture of concealment is basically how we try to conceal everything about period. We don't use the word
Mm.
period. We are taught to use something
Ah,
else like
we are
ABC
taught to
or what else.
cover like I've used that word before.
Yes,
Macam
you are taught to conceal the sanitary pad so nobody
yeah, macam
sees
nak
it. Whether
pass
it's
kat orang
clean.
pun or like nak ask around for pads pun macam you have to whisper. Kan macam can I have a
Yes.
pad? Macam it's such a it's we were taught that it's an embarrassing thing to have your periods. But
Yes,
it's
so
not.
that culture of concealment is held together. Like, why do we do it as women? Why do we continue to perpetuate the culture of concealment? So, some sociologists call it is the culture of concealment imperative. Like, we learn as women, we have to keep concealing things because if we don't, then there are a lot of things that is attached to menstruation. For example, that menstruation is dirty, that
Mhm.
menstruation is a disease, right? So we are embarrassed, so therefore we keep it, or we will not be treated fairly. So we learn to cover our menstruation. We cover everything about it, all the conversations, pain, and everything about menstruation, so that we do not attach ourselves to the menstruation because menstruation is considered something bad rather than something normal.
Mm.
So we hold on to that impact. We make it like I have to conceal everything. If not, I'll not get access to the social world like a regular male person, for example. So that is the other big thing. And it's not just in Malaysia, it's everywhere around the world that there is the culture of concealment.
Okay. So even not going into the issue of, period poverty and the inaccessibility to what we call apa a proper way of handling our periods lah. Macam even period itself, there's a stigma that goes around it, and it's more that what we see on the surface lah. Macam memang very macam it's very deep rooted in our
Mm,
culture, the way we grew up. Even me and my friends, we have like personal experiences. I'm sure everyone in this, like some of you guys in this Google Meet juga kan, with such experiences, it's so like when we think balik macam oh my god, that was so bad. Macam dulu we didn't know better, and now that we're starting to spread awareness, we still get macam backlash by some people yang memang tak tahu or like memang tak nak educate themselves about it, and that's why we need to like start spreading more awareness about it, because the issue is very deep rooted and like memang banyak lah. So macam it's very very serious. Okay. As just now you also mentioned about how period poverty is also related to menstrual hygiene, because it's not just literally poverty when it comes to things that are related to period. So maybe you can explain how Jeanette, wait, the question initially was that is there a direct relation between period poverty and menstrual hygiene, especially in regards to young adults? Maybe you can answer this question, or maybe you have something else to macam kupas
mm.
about this question. So it's basically about menstrual hygiene and period poverty and its relation lah. If
Yeah,
there
so
is
I
a
think
relation.
sometimes we frame the problem of period poverty as a hygiene problem
Mm-hmm.
because, yes, partially it is a hygiene problem, right? For example, not being able to manage our menstruation or the kinds of ways women or girls have learned how to manage their menstruation, because as a result of period poverty would have negative implications on their hygienic practices. Yes, so that's definitely something we have to think about and we have to accept. For example, girls not having access to sanitary pads, right? And because of the culture of concealment, people have resorted to different ways to manage their period poverty in terms of not having products, right? In using dirty cloth, in using like coconut husk, just they put
Mm-mm.
like sabut kelapa dalam socks, using handkerchief, using old newspaper, using, come up with different ways to try to figure out how to go about it. So that would definitely not be safe for those women or girls when we have to take those kinds of solutions lah, that we think that okay, I just have to get through this, so I'll just use this for a while. So that could have an impact on the skin lah kan, and also could have, for example, toxic shock syndrome and things like that. Or in some cases, we find that they might have access to sanitary pad, but it's not enough.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes ada satu je use the whole day. So it might seem like it's okay because it's like towards the end of the cycle, macam not a lot of blood, but still not safe actually. Hygienically pun not safe to use
Mm-hmm.
it for the whole extent of the day to just use one sanitary pad. And then sometimes what we find in our research is that girls, when they are at school, if the toilet or the water flow is very slow, or the toilet had the door tak boleh tutup, they would choose not to change their sanitary
Mm-hmm.
pad. So they might have access to pads, tapi the infrastructure is not available. So then those things affect them. And then we have this culture of washing the sanitary pad ni, washing the disposable sanitary pad. Okay, seemingly, or it has been taught to our population that it is for cleanliness purposes, right? So the idea is like, oh, you have to clean it, but the way in which it's being cleaned is not clean at all. In fact, it creates a lot of other problems. So we find that, for example, young girls who learn that they have to wash a disposable sanitary pad, they are grossed out by the fact that they have to do that. So instead of learning how to manage that, for example, they just learn to macam basuh, pijak, pijak, pijak. And then when they pijak the sanitary pad that's filled with water, it sort of explodes or it will tear apart. So then they already geli to touch it. So they're already using their feet. So they're never going to pick it up. They're not going
And
to
that
pick it
is,
up. So they're just going to like sort of like shove it into the drain ataupun flush it down the toilet. So we find problems relating to plumbing macam tu, that
mm-hmm.
is because of that. And then they don't sometimes don't clean the floors properly after they do that. So we have other problems that is supposed to be a solution becomes another problem, right? So those are like hygiene related issues. And then if we talk about external things like disposal management,
Mm-hmm.
when we send out disposable sanitary pad, for example, like we want to give disposable sanitary pad to women and girls who live in remote areas, but we didn't think to consider whether they can dispose it properly. What we find is that when NGOs come back the second time around, they just find floating sanitary pads around or being thrown everywhere because there's no disposal management. So it creates another hygiene problem. So those are the things that may be relating to hygiene issues.
So it's not just a personal thing. It's not just one person punya menstrual hygiene. It actually has bigger apa implications than that lah. Macam it could affect the society. It could affect the place, the
Hmm.
resident. So the place of residence. It could affect, what you said, what you mentioned about the plumbing system and whatnot. So it's got like bigger implications than we thought. Like I personally, some. Oh, I thought it would relate to macam personal menstrual hygiene je. Rupanya the issue is bigger than it seems. So, I'm learning a lot tonight because uh, so I hope that everyone else is also, because this is very eye-opening lah so far to me. Okay, so then so you can see that menstrual hygiene is not just relating to our body and whatnot. uh, do you think that there are anything else that should be taken into account, right, other than the ones that you've mentioned? Or if there is nothing else, then we can move to next questions ke?
I
Macam
think we
ada
can
tak?
yeah,
Move
I
to the
think we
next
can move
questions
on,
lah.
then we'll see if there is something else to add.
Okay. Okay, then if like that, because we received a few questions from the audience prior to this session tonight. Maybe I can read some of them and you could try to, okay. Because one of the question is, it's kind of technical because one of them asked if you can tell us the risks or effects on our body, specifically if we couldn't get proper hygiene care during our menstrual, during our period lah, basically. Are there any risks or effects? Because this pun, when anyone, even like we grow up, when we grow up pun macam, like you said just now about the yang bersihkan pad tu kan, we were taught to do that because, you know, cultural and religious issues, it's very deep rooted. So maybe some of us might not know, like, the about the risks lah that you have mentioned. If there should be any more that we should know.
Okay, I think a disclaimer, I am not a medical doctor. I am a sociologist, just to be safe and clear. What
Okay.
I share is based on what my colleagues who are doctors have shared with me. So I'll share some of them. But just to make sure, always go and check with your doctor if you are going through anything. Okay, so that's very important. We know that unsafe practices relating to menstrual hygiene can have implications, or like I said just now, toxic shock syndrome. If you use your sanitary pad or your tampons for too long, then that can happen. And then we also have issues relating to allergies or skin rashes that may be caused by prolonged use or unsafe or unclean use of menstrual products. So those are things that are relating to if you extend the use of your product more than it should. We have had cases where women have taken really extreme measures like choosing to starve themselves. I don't know if you've heard about this, but this is a very recent news that went like really viral. That this lady came out, and it's just because she came out to share her story, but we don't know what other stories lie behind closed doors, right? So this lady was brave enough to share her story. So she chose to starve herself so that she'll be malnourished, so that her menstruation wouldn't come. So then, obviously, those that would have other health implications. That should not be an option, okay, for us to try to manage our menstrual health. If you in any way need support or help in managing your menstrual hygiene and things like that, and you don't know where to go, just come and look for me. I'll channel you, okay? Just a quick disclaimer, just in case, okay? So we have issues like that, and that will be obviously problematic to one's health as well. And then we've had cases where they would use reusable cloth pad, but they didn't have enough, so they would share with their relatives, like because like for example, the kakak have period first, and then the mother will have it later in the month. So one is having period, the other one is not, then they will use the same cloth pad to go through it. So then that's also not safe in terms of transmission of bacteria and things like that. So these are some examples of perhaps like specific health concerns. And then if we're talking about menstrual pain, like I think in our culture generally, macam the label is senggugut. Or if you have
Oh
menstrual pain,
yes.
it's senggugut. And nobody thinks about like how bad the senggugut can be. Sometimes
Mhm.
there's this idea that if you have like really bad senggugut, you're just being dramatic, like chill lah, everybody pun period. Actually, if you have pain, like extreme pain, go and get yourself checked. Go to the doctor. You could have different you could have what's the word you could have different
Disease.
conditions. Yeah, it could be
Um,
endometriosis and things like that. So get yourself checked. So don't just accept like, oh, this is normal. So sometimes it's not, sometimes something is not right with our body, so we need to get a doctor check. So don't just accept that, oh, ni senggugut biasa.
I've also heard that some cases where they, because they want to prevent from having periods, they would opt for childbirth. I mean, they will opt for pregnancy instead. So this is like I've done a few readings lah about this very very concerning issue, because then it would it would bring implication yang macam financial implications macam because they would continuously have children tapi beyond their financial capacity. Kan? Maybe like you could kupas a
Yes.
bit more about this
I know
if
this is
you.
like the viral phase of period
Yeah.
poverty. Yeah, I think that the issue was not discussed properly, and it
Mm-hmm.
became like, oh, period poverty equals women getting pregnant, and then there's a lot
Mm-hmm.
of blaming on like, why are women so stupid to get pregnant? Isn't it more expensive? So let's unpack that so we can have
Yes.
a understanding of what it is instead of judging others. So when we're talking about pregnancy and period poverty, especially from a privileged position, it's easy for us to like, what is that? Macam this, totally discount that experience, kan? And think like, what are you talking about? So we heard about this a few years back, but it was so hard to trace, to find like where is this case happening, like to talk to the people who chose this. So in the beginning, I felt that it must have been very remote cases, and the cases that we found, we heard from NGO friends, so from grassroots actors. So I didn't get to talk to anybody who experienced it. And the cases that we found were cases that were happening in very remote areas. So and then we didn't find a lot of things about it, and then only I think it was last month or 2 months ago that because the issue of period poverty blew up again, and then there was more conversations around period poverty and things like that, people were willing to speak up, and people did a bit more digging. So we started to ask our NGO friends again, and then one of our NGO friends from Sabah in particular reported back to us. So they went to ask the ladies like, oh, did you choose this? Was this ever the choice? So we find that cases that we find are people who are experiencing extreme poverty, meaning that they don't have access to a lot of things. So their lives are nothing like the privileged lives that we live, that we can think about tomorrow, that we can think about future financial implications, that we're thinking about like, oh, how am I going to buy insurance for my kids, their education and things like that. So number one, that's not within their capacity. They're just thinking about the next day. Number two is that they don't have a lot of knowledge about the menstrual cycle and the reproductive system. So this is based on a very small cohort. Okay, so this might not be representative of all experiences, but these are some of the explanations that we have heard from. So they don't understand the menstrual cycle and how it works, and they sometimes believe that the menstruation is diseased and also is a problem that women experience. So the menstruation itself or period too is problematic, and it's not something that people, like, oh, tak apalah, normal lah, you ada period. Like, this is like menyusahkan sebab you ada period. So the option is number one, when you have period, it doesn't look good. Like everybody's annoyed at you, right? So we have had cases where young girls who dapat period at a very young age kena marah dengan parents dia orang because like they're poor, and then you get your period early. It's not really, nobody chooses what age we
It's
get our
not
period, kan? But
exactly.
yeah, but in this case, because they don't have a lot of knowledge about it, they feel like their child tu macam menyusahkan lah. It's like cursed, and then like we're poor, we don't have money to buy food, so we're not going to spend our money to buy some pets for you. So like they take the girls out of school because of that. So susah lah nak hantar pergi sekolah, nak kena belikan pet semua tu. So like, okay, it's better that you don't go to school, and then we marry you off, things like that lah. And then the other one is when you have kids, you are celebrated because you perform your duty and right as a female. Like, you, good job. You're bringing a child into the world, so that's a good thing. As opposed to you dapat period every month and then you ask me to buy you a pet, it's hard. Women do not exist in vacuums. We exist in a society, right? So it's not just on women to consider things. The other one is they are scared to say no to their husbands when their husbands request for intercourse. So that combined with a lot of things, and on top of that, they don't know that they can have access to family planning. So they are living remote and far away. They don't know that they have access to family planning, don't understand about their menstruation and reproductive system and things like that. And then with menstruation being something that's very stigmatized and considered dirty and bad, and having children is something that's good. Macam children tu kan is makes people happy if you have children. So there is a motivation to actually have children rather than to just go through menstruation. So it's not a simple choice of to have period or to have kids, you know. It's
Mhm.
more of the context of their life that they have to go through that. So the cases that we find that people have responded to mostly are in rural remote areas where their livelihood is different than in urban areas. Memang in urban areas it's clear cut, if you have kids it's going to be really hard financially, but in really extreme poverty it doesn't make a lot of difference, right? Kids are there and sometimes they survive on things that they grow. So the life is different. So for
Mhm.
us to understand that, we have to understand the context of their lives juga.
Okay, so based on what we've unpacked so far, I feel like there should be a discussion regarding mental health as well. Mental health, when in relation to the stigma that surrounds menstruation as a whole, lah. And then we can also take account period poverty, how it affects especially young girls because we're heavily stigmatized. So then we will grow up, probably with trauma, unresolved trauma and whatnot. And it's just maybe wait, maybe like is there like are there any cases yang memang nampak that how much it affects mental health, regardless of age lah, tapi usually in mostly in young adults and then growing up it would just traumatize for life. Okay, I don't know how to susun my ayat. Did you get what I'm
I get
trying
your
to?
question.
Okay.
Yeah. Um,
Sorry.
because the research on period poverty in Malaysia is super new, like we
Mhm.
were just like at the beginning of things. There are a lot of things we don't know in local context, so we can refer to like international context where they have done research. So far, even though like even at the international context, the research on period poverty is still very small, and that's really the culture of concealment for us, right? The culture of concealment is not just like our day-to-day lives, it's also the fact that we don't get to talk about period in the public space. We don't get to bring up issues relating to menstrual health and menstrual needs at the higher space, for example at the workplace or at the parliament to address needs, right? It's really strange if we think about it, because women make up half of the population, and then we menstruate for 30 years of our lives, and still like, there's not a lot of conversation that happens around it, and there's still so much needs that are not being addressed. Anyway, so the research on period poverty and mental health has not been done widely, but there are research that looks into how period poverty affects um, anxiety and depression. So there are relationships relating to period poverty and heightened anxiety and also depression in cases where there is shaming, in cases where they are discriminated from, for example, not having access to going to school, being teased at school, and things like that. So I can only I can only encourage people to do research in terms of looking at the local context, because we know by experience, and we also know by report the kind of stigma that goes around menstruation, and especially at school during adolescent years. So I would think that that would be, a huge importance for us to study how that impacts women and girls, and the kind of trauma that a lot of us went through. It's like a collective trauma that women and girls go through relating to our period of I saw someone write something about boarding schools. I didn't go to boarding school, but just through like doing our interviews and talking to more people, I realized there's a lot of things to unpack about menstruation in boarding schools. So we've heard stories, or we've heard reports about like the way that you throw your sanitary pad, and how if somebody doesn't throw their sanitary pad, everybody gets punished for it. Not in a
Yep.
it's not a safe and healthy kind of teaching moment. It's a
Mhm.
shaming, it's a public shaming that happens for everybody is being shamed. Instead of learning to be empowered to be clean, everybody is
Mhm.
shamed for having menstruation, for being dirty. So I cannot imagine, what the findings would be if we had done a research on that. So yeah, it will be something that's really important for us to look at.
Yeah, because personally, I went to a boarding school and we had so many issues when it comes to having periods. What you mentioned just now, that happened, and also period spot checks, and just the whole thing about shaming when it comes to having periods. And it's like, it's so, I realize how deep rooted it is. This issue is not just the stigma, it's not just the inaccessibility, it's just, it's something that we grew up with, it's something that we became used to. Padahal, you know, it's so, but so it's so distraught, it's such a, tala, I tahu, I'm so out of words. Sebab I just realized macam, oh, I went through all of that. And most, like probably a lot of my friends juga had to go through all of that. And we were teenagers, we were young adults, we were so young, having to go through shaming and growing up that we have to do this and that. Give it some, okay.
And I think
So
it's also traumatizing for some women and girls who have had to take on the roles of shaming others. So,
yes.
number one,
Be-
you experiencing it. Number two, you had to take on the role to tell people like that's shameful. So the kind
yeah,
of guilt that follows through that is also another thing that we would need to look at. Yeah.
it becomes kind of like a cycle lah, macam because we went through that, so we think that, oh, it's something that we have to do as well. Faham tak? Jadi macam, oh my god,
Yeah.
aku rasa it becomes like a culture thing that's basically unhealthy lah. For me, macam, I just started unpacking what really happened back in school. Semua macam, oh wow. So
That's a lot.
okay, yeah, that's a lot to unpack sebenarnya when it comes to this, especially breaking the stigma and whatnot. Okay, so I think we've got a bit more time before we can move on to the Q&A session with the audience. So maybe Doctor, you can share a few advice or maybe like words of encouragement, or maybe macam how do we go about to spreading more awareness and learning more about the stigma that revolves around period itself, and then the topic period poverty and all of those things like before we can move on to the Q&A session.
All right, I think this is an excellent example of what you can do, right?
Mhm.
Opening up space for conversation. I think conversation and continuing the conversation is really important. So opening up space where we can have a healthy and safe conversation about menstruation, about period poverty is what's needed to start things rolling. And as we go on, talking about things, we will realize, or people will realize, where they can come in and where they can bring, their expertise or their skills or their strength to participate or to help in addressing issues of period poverty, or what we call in achieving period parity. Because when we're talking about period poverty, we're looking at two issues. Number one is issues of wealth inequality, right? Poverty issues, so people not having access to products, people not having access to infrastructure. And then we also have the issue of gender inequality, right? Relating to discrimination, relating to access to social life, political life, and things like that. So we could address those two things, and look at how those two things affect women's lives. So everybody, or people coming from different areas and different expertise would have different solutions to the problems, or could look at the problems differently. Say, for example, I'm a sociologist, so obviously my angle is always trying to connect and identify the relationship of things, and understanding culture, and understanding the different social structures. But somebody working in engineering, for example, Somebody working in design could help period poverty in different ways, in creating new technology, in designing new products, for example. Or somebody working in finance could think about how we could come up with better ways to produce sanitary pads and things like that. So everybody would be able to, just like someone from psychology. So the more we talk about it, the more people can think about how they can come in and bring all the solutions in. So creating that conversation is also important. Then obviously there is the education part in terms of teaching people about what's healthy and what's not healthy. So conversations like this will usually motivate people to go back and check, like, oh, okay, do I know what menstrual cycle is? Or if you're a mom or a sister, you want to know that, okay, if something that I didn't learn, I didn't get, I need to make sure that my sister's learning the right things, are given the right spaces, are not being shamed for it, or my kid or my daughter or my nieces and nephew get the right information, are taught to be respectful, for example. So the education part also can happen while we have these conversations. So my advice definitely at this kind of spaces is to create the conversation. But okay, I just want to address one issue, because I think the more we talk about period poverty, realistically, obviously, the positive part is everybody or more people learn about it, right? Hopefully, like in this space, everybody's learning better things. But if we don't create a safe and healthy space, sometimes some of us may experience like bullying and things like that. So we have to also be real about whether or not, right? So consider whether you are in a safe space to have that conversation or not.
So basically, take some very careful, be very careful because it's fairly new, and start small by creating conversations. Because at the end of the day, the more people learn about it, the more people can play their own roles according to what their expertise is. Lah, okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense juga, because it's not just about educating awareness, it's also about creating a safe space. That's what's most important, so that the more people learn about it, the more they can feel like, oh, I have a role in this, I can play to make it better in ways that I can lah. Okay, so thank you for the sharing so far. So right now, I think we can proceed to the Q&A session. If anyone in the audience have any more questions to ask Doctor, and or maybe have any concerns that you would like to discuss, anything that you would like to share, feel free to. So we're gonna open kind of like a Q&A and also a sharing session lah. Where maybe you can share your experiences as well, because I'm pretty sure we grew up probably in very similar environments. So okay. Anyone?
Can I ask a question?
Go ahead.
Hello, Assalamualaikum Dr. Fatima. My name is Haifa. I actually wonder, I know that period poverty is something new, and the invention of sanitary pads, the
Yes.
invention of menstrual cups and tampons are
Mm.
actually new as well. So I would like to ask, like, how did our ancestors or the women before this invention actually went through their menstruation? Was it during that time, historically or ancient time? Did they, like, for so long, did they experience poverty, or like they managed to survive or something like that? Like, because I had a conversation with my father, and my father said, try think like our ancestors, like how did they manage to survive menstruation back then? So it made me wondering, did they actually also experience the inaccessibility to safe menstruation environment?
Okay, so I cannot say for certain for all like societies historically, okay, but what we know is that in a lot of societies, women struggle with their menstrual hygiene and menstrual health. and also the old way, or the way that we used to do things before, also showed that there were a lot of stigma and taboo around women menstruating because women would leak, right? And then there's a lot of stigma around women being dirty. For example, historically, if we look at different studies, show that the idea of women being dirty was very, very prevalent in a lot of societies. Therefore, they wouldn't be given access to spaces, right? If you know, in some societies, women would be put in a hut because they would leak. So they didn't want to contaminate other spaces, or they wouldn't be allowed to cook food and touch food. So it isn't always positive, right? Yes, we obviously, women survive through all of that, but with technology and better access to infrastructure and sanitation and better understanding of menstrual health, we are able to manage things better today. So I would ask myself, like, why would I want to go back to that position where women didn't have access to proper sanitation, and things like that. So yeah, I think because we have better facilities and we have better understanding, and we can, we can already, this is super cliche, but we can already go to the moon and go to this, like, go to space, but we still want women to go back to, like, past use of cloth, and like allow ourselves not to be able to go out because we're going to leak. That, just to me, that doesn't make sense. Yeah. Because there's a lot of discrimination that happens to women because we menstruate, but now we're able to menstruate better. That gives us access to social life. So I don't think that we should accept that we should just take the bare minimum. In fact, I think we should push to get better rather than, like, let's go back to bare minimum. Yeah, which wasn't very ideal anyway. Are there questions in the chat?
Yeah, there's one question from Mama Aiman. As a guy, how can a guy help? Yeah, because
That's a
they're
really
not
good
both.
question. Thank you so
Mhm.
much, Aiman. Actually, we didn't cover this part, isn't it, in the queue just now in the questions. When we talk about period poverty or menstrual hygiene in general, menstrual health, even though women experience menstruation and have to go through it, when we're talking about solutions and we're talking about addressing period poverty, it is an effort by everyone. So it's not just for women to think about and for women to address, it's also for everybody to understand. So, number one, it starts with understanding. And as a society, we should begin by educating boys as well, not just girls. For example, at school, usually girls and boys are separated, and then girls are taught about period and things like that, and then boys go to another place because they're not supposed to know, right? But do they really not know anything? That's not true. They know something, but what they know is not healthy, and what they know is not respectful. So that creates another problem. So we find cases where girls report, and I think maybe some of you can also share your stories, where girls report that boys would tease them about their period. So we find that, boys experience understanding about menstruation in a strange way as well, that they are excluded from the conversation, but they are also taught certain things. Some problematic things include the sexualizing of menstruation, right? The shaming of women for having menstruation. And for boys who don't participate in that, they're not taught how to go about it in a respectful way. So instead of sort of showing up with support and respect, they retreat completely. So even though they see their friends teasing other girls, they learn not to say anything. They just learn to keep quiet and feel bad, perhaps, but not really do something about it. So, in bringing boys into the conversation and teaching them how to go about it in a healthy and safe way, number one, it creates an understanding. Number two, it means that, the knowledge that they get is accurate and the knowledge that they get is right. Because, unfortunately, the reality is that when a girl gets pregnant, for example, it's not that she got pregnant alone. It's always a two-way kind of relationship that happens. So then we have issues like that, where we have issues relating to teenage pregnancies, for example. And then when people get married and become parents, or they become spouses, there's also the husband who needs to understand what the wife is going through. And then we have fathers also. So men play a lot of different roles because we live together in a society. So it's something that we all have to understand. So there's always a role for men to play at different junctures of their lives. So as siblings, as parents, in a lot of families in Malaysia where it is um what do we call it, single earner families, where the father is the breadwinner, right? Sometimes the father is also the financial controller of the household. So we find that if the father does not understand the allocation that's needed to buy sanitary pad, that also becomes problematic. We also have men who think that sanitary pads are accessories, that it's not a necessity, or they don't understand how it's used, how much needs to be used, or they don't understand like how, what are the needs of women during this time, how do they need to manage their menstruation. So those understanding is, at the very least, understanding what menstruation is the bare minimum. And then we also have, in a society like Malaysia, most position of authority is taken up by men who gets to make decisions for women and people under their care. So being bosses, being ketua kampung, ketua kawasan pengerusi, kawasan perumahan, and then you become a minister or parliamentarian. There's so many levels that there is leadership that's held by men. So the lack of awareness and understanding means that there is no conversation that's being had about the needs of women. So just by giving education, proper education to men, then they can have a better understanding. And my experience is that in doing this in the last 2 years, just by giving information and sharing education about menstruation has helped so many men understand, and they have been so positive about addressing issues of period poverty because they realize, whoa, I didn't know that this was important, and because I know it's important, I will take the lead to make sure that this doesn't happen to the women under my care. So it's really important to have this conversation with men, and also to empower men that you can do something that's safe and healthy, that doesn't make women feel unsafe about it, that you can ask women in a safe and healthy way and respectful way, that women do not feel like you're being, that you are sexualizing them. So that's really important. So we want to create those kind of spaces, and we want to create those kind of conversations with men, so that they know that, oh, actually I need to think about these people. I need to, sometimes it's just knowing that we don't get to choose when the blood comes out with menstruation. It's not like going to the toilet, you can hold on to your pee. Those kind of information that may be basic for us women, that men don't understand, that sometimes we need to educate boys and men about.
All right, doctor. Just now you've mentioned out about the reusable menstrual cloth earlier, right? So how does this can actually help or benefit the period poverty community? And do you think we should start be giving out reusable menstrual cloth rather than the traditional disposable pads? Because I know these, when we talk about these disposable pads, right, it has a link to menstrual wastage. And then some people would say that, by using the reusable menstrual cloth can actually like help the period poverty community because it can actually like be reused a lot of time. So what's your opinion on it?
All right, okay. That's a really good question, and I get this question a lot. So there are two options that are usually suggested, or there are two options that we can think about when we're talking about sustainable product, right? Environmentally sustainable, because we think about like the implications, especially the IAM students, right? SDG and things like that. So you're thinking about, oh, okay, it's not recyclable, then all the the rubbish that it's made and things like that. So we have the reusable cloth pad, right? So it's a cloth pad that looks like a disposable sanitary pad, and it's reusable. And then we have the menstrual cup, which is a silicone cup to be inserted into the vagina, and it holds the blood in there. And then you take it out and throw out the blood, and then you wash it, and you can reuse it. So the reusable cloth pad, I think you can use it for I think 3 years, if I'm not mistaken. And then the menstrual cup, you can use it to 7 to 10 years. So the first purchase might be a bit more expensive, but if you think about it in the long run, yes, it is also number one, environmentally more sustainable, economically more sustainable. But is it the solution to addressing period poverty? Then, in order for us to know whether or not it's a sustainable solution in terms of people's lives, we have to look also at the social cultural context in which they live in. So locally in Malaysia, we have some social enterprises who work to make reusable cloth pads, and they would distribute it to marginalized communities. Okay, so there are several companies that do this, and some have been doing it for a very long time, way before I even went into the research on period poverty. So they've been addressing period poverty for a long, long time. So they're like super, super senior, championing the problems, but they always go to rural, remote areas, and it works, and it's very helpful, the cloth pad. Okay, so I also had the same question, and I wondered, like, why don't you give it to the urban poor? So I just asked them, like, oh, why don't you give it to the urban poor? The response was, they don't use it. We've tried, we've given it several times, but they don't use it. So the usual response is not to fault the social enterprises, of course, because they do the work, they have really good intention and things like that. And I suppose this is where my expertise comes in, right? So they said maybe they have like attitudinal problems, the malas nak basuh and things like that. But I wasn't satisfied with that, because I don't think people are just malas. And I think, it's not a fair judgment of people. And this idea of poor people having attitudinal problems is really against everything I believe. So I wasn't happy with that response. So my research is in the PPR area where the urban poor lives. I started to ask the girls, like, would you consider using it? And then they said, malu, tak nak lah malu. And then I said, kenapa malu? Because they have to hang it outside of their house. Because in the PPR, you hang your clothes in a shared space, right? In the area where everybody can see your laundry. So I thought, oh, okay. So I like, okay, malu is like one of the reasons why they don't do it. And then I always share this story lah. And then one day, I was having lunch with one of the makcik that lives there lah. Sajalah, like she became my friend, so I was just having lunch at her house. And then on the way out tu, I wanted to go back to my car lah. And then she said, doktor tak apa, saya hantar doktor turun bawah. And I said, no lah, Kak, tak apa, saya turun je bawah, dekat je kereta dengan tangga kan. She said, no, tak boleh. Hari tu anak jiran kena cabul dekat tangga. And I was so shocked on the way to school. So the kid was molested on her way to school, just at the stairwell going down. And I realized it was not just they are shy, it's not they're just embarrassed by the shape of the menstrual pad, but it's also the fact that they're not safe, right? Because of how sexualized menstruation is, if they were to put the sanitary pad outside with the shape that looks like a sanitary pad, it's really not safe. It's not just the fact that malu for no reason. The malu comes with a reason, and it's a very valid reason. It's also a safety issue. So it's not just to educate them, tak payahlah malu. Like, there's one thing to educate people untuk tak payah malu, but sometimes there's a real reason why they are malu or they don't want to do something. And they cannot obviously hang the sanitary pad inside the house, because then that wouldn't be hygienic. So if you use a reusable cloth pad, you need to hang it where there's sunlight. Okay, so so the reusable cloth pad have been really effective in rural remote areas. This is an example of context, okay? It's not to say that it can never work. It's just to say that we have to understand the context of the people we want to help and support. It's not just about what we think is the good solution, the right solution. The other one is the menstrual cup. Okay, with the menstrual cup, I don't think it's a hard thing for us to understand. Like, okay, we live in Malaysia. There's a lot of conversations around virginity, and inserting anything into the vagina is considered bad and things like that. So we would think that, oh, that must be really hard, right, to change that. And I think for many of you, or in fact most of you, you would also feel like, oh, I might not want to consider using it for myself, even though like I'm educated, even though I know that it has nothing to do with my self-worth and things like that, but it's still something that we internalize really strongly. But what we did was, we were really lucky because during this pandemic, people started understanding what period poverty was, and then there was this donor that wanted to give out sanitary products to B40 girls. So they managed to have the funding, and what they did was they gave a box of hygiene kit. And in the box, they put disposable sanitary pad, reusable sanitary pad, and a menstrual cup. So they gave it out to about 150 girls. Okay, and I was really lucky because we managed to talk to them, and they allowed us to run research alongside the distribution. So what we found was, out of the girls that received the hygiene kit, all of them used the disposable sanitary pad, obviously, because that's the most widely used product. None of them used the reusable cloth. So we're looking about because these are urban girls, but we had a group of girls that used the menstrual cup. So these are girls below the age of 18. So that was a really like shocking finding, like, whoa, like why are these girls using the cup, right? But what we found out was that the girls who used the cup knew somebody else that also used the menstrual cup. So that's like, this is like our super preliminary finding. So we don't know this, but we've talked to like some friends, or not really friends, like some acquaintances who are also people who sell sanitary products. So they also find that that's important. It's important for women who want to learn to use menstrual cup to know somebody in real life who also uses menstrual cup. So the support is important. So there are research in Kenya, for example, that they do the same. So whenever they want to introduce a menstrual cup, so in Kenya, they would give it to like a whole kampong, so that all the girls in that kampong can go to school. But they would give it with support. That means they would support the women and girls through, all of them in the whole kampong, to learn how to use a menstrual cup. Otherwise, there's a lot of taboo and stigma around insertion of the cup as well. So that means if girls are taught with support, and they know somebody they trust who also uses it, they are more likely to use it. So there is some hope in, at least in the urban areas, to give out the menstrual cup and for that to work. But it also needs to come with support, and that's something that all of us need to learn actually. When we try to address a problem in Malaysia, we tend to do a touch and go, right? Kita bagi-bagi and then kita pergi, so we're done, like never to see you again. But we want to make sure that whenever we want to address something, we have to make sure that it's meaningful, right? That we create a long-lasting relationship. So that kind of support is also important. Okay, that's one. The other one is, what about like homeless women, for example, or women in other areas? The other tricky thing we want to think about is the infrastructure. In some parts, in the rural, remote areas, they cannot do anything because they don't have access to clean water. So without access to clean water, you cannot give them the reusable cloth pad, and you cannot give them the menstrual cup because they cannot clean it properly. Just like homeless women, it's hard for them to clean the product. So we have to be creative and we have to be innovative. So this is where, people who have expertise in this area should come in to invent something or to come up with ways in which you can solve that problem. Yes. With the flood victims, Ayuni, I'm really happy because we've been trying to say this. I've been trying to say this so many times in all of my talks. Like, please remember that period poverty doesn't just happen like on a day-to-day basis, but it can also happen when there's natural disasters. So think about women, who go through that. So this year, mashallah, with almost every collection, we will see like sanitary pad. So that's like, alhamdulillah, that's such a big win because that's never been on the agenda before. So much so that somebody was telling me yesterday, because everybody remembered like, oh, we have to put sanitary pad, they were running this collection and they had a bunch of sanitary pad to be sent to an old folks home, and they forgot, okay, old folks home don't need sanitary pad. But the fact that people are starting to think about the sanitary pad, so that's really important. Yeah. So that's a big win. That's something that's, for us to be hopeful about. Okay, are there any other questions?
I think I actually, as I used to go like back in 2013, my house was also affected by floods, and yeah, we don't receive that help. We don't get pets actually. So when I found out this year, and there's like a lot of awareness of people giving up pets, I feel like alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, people actually take notice of that, because back then when I had to go through that, they don't give out that, they give out clothes instead. Yeah.
Yeah, we can see like there's a positive outcome lah out of having these conversations in the first place. Is that people no longer hesitate to include these sanitary pads and whatnot, because they're starting to see it as a basic necessity as well, not just not just basic hygiene kits. They also would include. That's a very positive thing that's come out lah, especially recently. So applause to all of us. So, are there any other questions from the audience before we can proceed to our next? Any other concerns or experiences? Okay, because if there is no more questions, we can proceed to the photography session, and then we would have a lucky draw session where we would give out some apa nama dia, buah hati lah, cendera hati to the audience for tonight. So, but before that, we can have a photography session. Anyone in this meet, you guys can open up your cameras and we can take a picture together to commemorate having this event, having this conversation. Okay, don't be shy. Um, you guys can get ready to open your cameras. Maybe we'll give a few minutes for everyone. Okay, so I think we're gonna wait. Okay lah. Uh, I understand that it's a Friday night, so maybe not everyone would be in proper, dress. So we're just gonna take a picture now, if you guys don't mind. Okay, so on the count of three. Okay, one, two, three. Okay, one more. Maybe you can have a freestyle. Okay, one, two, three. All right. So thank you, everyone. Doctor, you can also stay if you would like to, because we're gonna have a lucky draw session. We're gonna pick anyone from the audience and give out some Chandrahati. So would you like to stay, Doctor, for this?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you, everyone, for staying in and listening in, and asking questions. Please do follow Peduli Merah, as we do updates, or if you're interested to support period poverty work in Malaysia, you can follow Peduli Merah and other NGOs and also activists who also speak up on period poverty. Okay, I hope I'll see
Yes.
all of your faces somewhere again, inshallah.
Yes, Doctor, before you leave, I would also like to thank you for taking your time to answer the questions that we have today, to basically open our eyes to all the underlying issues and, the deep rooted problems surrounding the stigma around period and whatnot. So before we move on to to close this session, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day and night, basically, for this conversation. I hope that we can have more in the future, and I hope that your work about this whole period poverty issue and anything regarding it will continue to prosper and grow in the future. I wish you all the
Ameen.
best, Doctor. Thank you so much.
Thank
And
you so much.
yes, thank you everyone for also participating and joining. Okay, because I thought Doctor was gonna stay. I almost forgot.
Oh, it's
Okay.
okay. I can
So
stay. What? Stay for the lucky draw. Yeah,
yeah,
I can
yeah,
stay for the lucky
but
draw. Maybe
okay,
I'm
yeah. Thank you
lucky.
so much. But if you got lucky juga kan. Okay, I mean I can start lah kot. Thank you.
Ifa, are you ready with the spin wheel?
Uh, this is off topic. You know, I'm actually looking forward for like one day we have like this conversation, not just open to girls, but I really would love to see the participants in the in this forum would be men also, because I'm really curious what their perspective really is about this matter. Yeah.
I've actually been in a few spaces where there are a lot of men and boys in the room. So Alhamdulillah, I think it's been a healthy conversation. So we have to set the tone right, and I think there are a lot of respectful men and young men who are actually wanting to, be part of it in a way that is helpful. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do have this one friend of mine, a guy. He brings spare pet with him in his bag, and he's like
Yeah,
Interesting.
I've also
yeah.
encountered a few guys who do the same because they're starting to understand what having period really is. They're starting to educate themselves more about this and not just believing in the stigma that they grew up with. So it's really starting. There's a positive light lah. That's really starting to. I'm really starting to see it juga.
Yeah.
Eh, you were you were waiting for that. Okay, whenever you guys are ready lah. I'll leave it to Amira then for the lucky draw. Is that okay?
Sure. Okay, should we start with the first spin, Ifa?
Okay.
My name was not in there.
We already. I thought we already added.
Like,
Doctor, we got.
ada.
Ada Dr. Fatima.
There you go, doctor. We actually, for your information, doctor, we're actually giving out a four
No,
set
I'm
of.
just joking. Spin it again. I was
It's
so
for
You
you,
got
doctor.
lucky anyway.
No, it's meant to be.
I'm so sorry. I was just
No,
joking.
it's okay. It's your luck
That is so
tonight, doctor.
hilarious. Okay.
That's
All
okay.
right, there you go, Dr. Fatima, as the first lucky person.
I'm very
Okay,
Okay.
lucky.
Before that, maybe Amira, you can explain what we're giving out tonight for the lucky draw.
yeah, for your information, I believe like the participants would know because on the poster itself, we actually put it's actually a set of four reusable menstrual cloth. There are like four sizes from starting from size S to the XL. So you can actually like even if you're not a person who has like a heavy menstrual flow, you can actually share it with your sisters or your mother or even your friends. So
And
like this
it's
whole yes,
I don't know. Okay, continue.
okay.
Nanti I
So
cakap.
this whole four set will be giving out to three lucky person, yeah,
Yeah.
including doctor.
Okay, so like also because recently we've got the flood victims. So if you're not going to use it for yourself, maybe you can just salurkan to the victims as well. So it's any initiative, even as small as this one, would count lot to help. So congrats again,
Yeah.
doctor. for
Please,
winning.
please give mine to someone, okay? Because I use a
Okay.
menstrual cup. So yeah.
Oh, that's really great, doctor. Okay, next spin.
Okay.
Oh, is no Camelia Fatiha here? My friend.
Hi. Okay, congrats,
Camilla,
Camelia. Thank
are you
you.
there? Congrats.
All right,
Okay.
so it's gonna be the last one. Okay.
Oh, I nearly thought Muhammad Aiman was gonna win. It would be really interesting to have a guy win those Chandra. But congratulations, Zuria. Is Zuria here? Okay, so for those who won, except for Doctor, because you would like to salurkan to other people, can. If you guys would like to have the prizes, you can just PM any one of us in the WhatsApp group. We'll share it later lah. Okay, so again, before we end our session tonight, thank you to everyone who's participated tonight, and congrats to all of us. A big round of applause to all of us for having for going forward to have this conversation. It's a small step, but it's very very meaningful, as we can see even recently, and it's going to be very meaningful in the future as well. And thank you especially to Dr. Fatima for the very very meaningful sharing of your research and of what you've known so far about period poverty, about the stigma that surrounds period. So hopefully, even referring to our title for tonight, break the stigma period, we can take more steps in the future and even now to break the stigma that surrounds period and itself lah. So thank you again. Oh, how many times have I said thank you? And I hope to see all of you guys again, maybe some familiar faces in the future. And I hope that we can achieve more positive, as positive things like in the future, especially regarding period. Okay, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your sharing. Thank you, Doctor. And yeah, see you guys next time, hopefully, inshallah. Thank you. Bye
Thank
bye.
you.
Thank
Assalamualaikum.
you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Have a good weekend,
Good
everyone.
night. Yes, good night and good
Yeah.
weekend,
Everyone, please
everyone.
stay safe here.
Yeah, see.
Stay
Okay.
safe and stay dry.
Bye.